In this lesson, we're going to be talking about protocol checking. So what do I mean by protocol checking? Well, protocol checking is where I'm going to connect directly or manually to a specific server, and I'm going to issue protocol commands to that server. That allows me to do things like check different aspects of the protocol, like different extensions maybe that it supports, as well as the version and potentially software type of the server in question. So for doing this, there are of course a few utilities I could use, but what I'm going to use is our old friend Netcat. So I'm going to use Netcat, and I'm going to connect to the host www.google.com. I'm going to connect on port 80, which of course is the web port, and I'm going to issue an HTTP request here. So I've got my HTTP request, and it says bad request. So there's something that's wrong about the way this is done. And you can see what it's given me is it's given me a server name and a version. So I get GFE 2.0. So that's the server name and the version, or the software name and the version. So let's get a little bit deeper here. So there was something wrong with what I sent. And error messages are very helpful, so sometimes it's useful to send something bogus, like that / is often going to give you a bad request. And the reason for that is because we are at HTTP version 1.1, and the server may have assumed either 1.1, in which case I was missing the 1.1, or it may have assumed 1.0. Either way, I didn't specify the version number, so there could be different things wrong with what I sent there. So in this case, I'm going to specify version 1.1 of the protocol. So I'm going to say head, so give me the headers, /, which just means give me your index page, whatever the default index page for the top of your web directory is, and I'm going to communicate with you using HTTP version 1.1. So with 1.1, we opened the door to having multiple virtual hosts on the same IP address. So with 1.1, I can have a lot of different web servers living at the same IP address, which means I now have to specify which host I want to talk to. If I'm going to be using HTTP 1.1, I've got to use this host line in my headers. And now I have to send a blank line saying I'm done with the headers I'm sending, process the request. So now what I've got here is a response that says HTTP 1.1. So that's the version that I was communicating with. It says 200 OK, and 200 is just the status code. OK means yes, it worked. And I've got some additional information here. So I've got some cookies. I've got a couple of cookies here. So the domain is .google.com, and I've got an HTTP only cookie as well. And there is a P3P header and a server header here. And the server is GWS, and that's the Google Web Server. Not surprisingly, since I connected to the Google Web Server, I would be using the Google Web Server software. So we found out some interesting things about this particular server that we are connecting to. Interestingly, I got two different server banners depending on what I did. So the first one was when I got an error. I got the server GFE /2.0, and when I didn't get an error and it was processed correctly, I went to the Google Web Server. So that's some interesting information that you may be able to use down the road. Now, of course, web servers and HTTP aren't the only things I can use Netcat for. I can also use them to connect to mail servers, among several other hosts, but let me just demonstrate mail servers here, and you get an idea for the things you can do. And if you know the protocols, you can connect to any server that you want using Netcat. So I want to look up the mail server record for google.com. So it tells me that I've got several mail servers here. Let's just take the one with the lowest priority. So I'm going to take this one here, going to connect with Netcat again. And in this case, I'm going to connect to port 25, which is the SMTP port. So this tells me that it's running eSMTP or extended SMTP. So that's SMTP with a bunch of extensions that allow us to do some different things. So I'm going to issue an extended hello or EHLO, and I'm just going to give it a bogus domain name here. So now here's what we've got for a response. mx.google.com at your service. And it says 64.223.94.46 is what I happen to be connected to. So I can do a size 8-bit MIME start TLS, which would allow me to do an encrypted session with this particular server. And I could also do enhanced status codes. So I could just start interacting with this server now. And this gives me a syntax error. So what I've got here looks kind of like a host name to me. So this may be an internal host name, CK9SI, etc., etc., etc. So that looks kind of like a host name to me given where it actually is. And the same sort of thing here because I've got the same thing twice. And that may provide me some information down the road. But of course, what it's telling me is this is the external name, mx.google.com. So that's the external name of this particular set of SMTP servers here at Google. So again, I could use Netcat to connect to a wide range of services. I could connect to, let's see, pop.google.com on port 110. And that doesn't actually give me anything, or the service isn't on that particular port number. So there's a lot of different things that I could do with Netcat, and I could connect to any service that I want and start interacting with it. I could issue bogus commands and just see how it replies, or I could probe it with valid protocol commands and see what responses I get about its capabilities and what information it may be willing to give up about itself and maybe the network that it's on. So that's just protocol checking with Netcat.